Hi everybody, welcome to Dram Daddy Whiskey. I'm Dan, and tonight we are going to be tasting a Scotch that pretty much every fan of peated Scotch pines for every year when this limited edition release comes out. We're talking about Octomore 13.1. Octomore is released every year by the Bruichladdich distillery on Islay in Scotland. Islay is famous for producing world-renowned peated scotches. And while names like Lafroy and Ardbeg and Lagavulin are synonymous with peated Scotch these days, Octomore might take the cake for the most anticipated yearly release of a peated Scotch. They call Octomore super heavily peated with a ppm of 137.3. ppm meaning peated parts per million. In a previous video I did on one of last year's Octomore releases, I talked about how the ppm of a Scotch is not the end-all be-all of how smoky it's going to taste. A higher ppm does not necessarily mean you're going to get a smokier Scotch. There are a lot more variables to that. With respect to Bruichladdich in particular, the most important one, I believe, is the still. Bruichladdich still is very tall. And when you have a really tall still, the vapor that you produce when you heat up the mash, the alcohol vapor, as it gets higher up that still and further away from the heat source on the bottom of the pot still, what happens is that it'll end up cooling down before it gets to the top, and it will condense. It'll turn back into liquid, but it'll fall back down until it gets hot enough again to then re-evaporate. This is a process called reflux. Every time that happens, you're gonna lose a little bit of the flavor components from the original mash. And when you have a peated mash, when you have peated barley that's being used in your mash, like you do in this whiskey, the more reflux that occurs, the less of that peat influence you're going to get. So a 137 ppm Scotch that you get from Bruichladdich might taste less smoky than 137 ppm Scotch you get from a different distillery. And I believe that's one reason why Bruichladdich can get away with using this high ppm compared to other notable peated Scotches on the market. Because if they didn't have that reflux occurring, or maybe other variables that are decreasing the level of smokiness from such a high ppm, it would be like drinking liquid ash. Ash. Straight up drinking ash. Let's look at a few more stats. It's 59.2% ABV, so just under 120 proof. It is unchill filtered and coloring free. It is aged 5 years in an ex-bourbon cask with Scottish mainland barley of the Concerto variety. And this bottle cost me a pretty penny, $207.99. Oh, so sleek. If you know of a sleeker, cooler bottle of whiskey, you're a liar. Let's try this bad boy. Damn it. The problem with spilling heavily peated Scotch all over yourself is you smell like ash for a while. So just from spilling that on me and pouring it in this glass, there's just like, it's like a plume of smoke just entered the room. I'm not complaining. Super clear on this one. I mean, you can tell that there's no coloring added for sure, but also that it's pretty young. Because a 5-year Scotch, that's almost unheard of, but you can get away with releasing a younger Scotch when you peat it. A naysayer would say that the peat is actually covering up some of the youthful characteristics. I think the peat actually works really well with the youthful notes in a lot of younger Scotches. And Octomore generally is no exception. All right, on the nose. And with these heavily peated Scotches, I really like to start nosing it from a lot farther away, just to try to pick up on more of that nuance. Whew. So as you get more into the Scotch, I actually pick up on the sweet malt quite a bit. The smoke is there, but at its core, this is a sweet malt forward Scotch. There's almost like a hint of like a green pepper or a green chili or something on there too. It's a really good nose. More complex than I would have expected from a younger Scotch that's so heavily peated. The sweetness of the malt is almost like a melon note, but that really fades quickly into that pepper finish. And I don't mean like a ground black pepper, maybe a ground white pepper, but it's more like a chili pepper. In the past, I've gotten hints of the bourbon casks that these were aged in, but I'm not really picking up on that right now. Maybe after I try to palate and go back to the nose. So let's see, the palate. Wow, right away I get that pepper note, like that chili note. And then on the mid palate, the sweet malt, the like melony flavor that I talked about, and then it hits the back palate and it's like someone dropped a smoke bomb. Whew. And it fills your mouth and down the finish with smoke. That's crazy. And the longer you wait on the finish, the smoke slowly kind of fades away and you get that sweet melony note again coming up from the back. But the chili, peppery sort of spice with the smoke lingers on the front palate. What a ride. Second sip. A similar experience, maybe not as high of a contrast between each point on the palate. It's nice, it's sweet, it's spicy. The smoke is less pronounced now that I'm used to it from the first sip. It's super viscous, very oily. The longer you wait on the finish, there's almost a tiny bit of like a sourness that accompanies the smoke, but it's barely there. And it's not that bad. I think it's actually like part of the sweetness kind of turning into a little bit sour. That melon note. Sip number 3. Wow. And this time the smoke's more prevalent on the back. Oh, with that chili pepper spice. That is so cool. These distinct notes are awesome. Every one of them is really good and really enjoyable on its own. The fact that they're all so different and they change across the palate and each one is so good, but it's unpredictable is when you're gonna get each one. It's fantastic. And yes, on the nose, when I come back to it after sipping it a few times, I'm getting 2 new notes that I didn't pick up on before. There's a little bit of saltiness. I wouldn't go as far as to say briny, but like headed that direction. And you do get the smallest hint of those bourbon casks. Like, this is gonna sound awful, but it's not. Like the stale vanilla you would expect from a cask that's used and had some of the vanilla sucked all out of it from bourbon. So maybe the narrative is kind of leading me on this one. But I feel like I'm picking up on that note. But yeah, the more I smell it, the more salty and now I'd say briny this is getting. Those chili notes are there too. Like some seaweed now is on the nose. And this time on the palate, the sweetness is emphasized, that melon note. Before ducking into now some like white pepper and the smoke's less noticeable. Octomore 13.1, a roller coaster where every twist, every turn, every rise, every fall is amazing. Even the finish I'm left with now after having it is just so good. The whiskey in this bottle receives a score from me of 9.4. This is one of the absolute best peated scotches I've ever had. The grade for the release as a whole, all things considered. Really good whiskey, obviously, but the 208 bucks I got it for was a deal, and it's incredibly tough to find. But that's almost expected. It's the yearly limited release that everyone anticipates, and the whiskey is phenomenal. But it's only 5 years old. Bigger but, that doesn't matter because it's so good. I like peated scotch, so for me, this release gets an A+. Absolutely fantastic. Am I crazy? Have I been drinking too much? Is this not as good as I think it is? Let me know. Comment, let us know. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more like this, please subscribe. Until next time, I'll be pining for more whiskeys as good as this one. Cheers.